When Jeremy Renner's car broke down in front of an old auto repair shop with faded signs in one of Los Angeles' outlying neighborhoods, he thought a quick check would suffice. Inside, an elderly mechanic worked alone, his tired hands bearing the marks of years spent under dim lights. The man's quiet determination left a lasting impression on Jeremy, even after he left. Tough but lonely. A week later, Jeremy returned to pay his debt. But when he arrived, the shop was closed, the lights were off, and the doors were locked. What he learned shortly after left him frozen in place. Before moving on to the story, write in the comments where you watched the video. And if you enjoy stories about real people, subscribe to Legacy Light Stories. As the sun set over Los Angeles, a rusty orange glow spilled onto the streets. Outside the city, in an old-fashioned repair shop on the country road, Henry Carter wiped his hands inside. At 72, Henry had spent his life under the hood. His modest, unassuming shop had managed to stay afloat without being overshadowed by chain service centers. It wasn't luxurious, but it was reliable. However, reliability couldn't cover hospital bills. When Henry felt a familiar ache in his chest, he pressed his hand against it. "Just fatigue," he muttered to himself. That night, as he was about to close the shutters, the sound of a roaring engine filled the air. Turning his head, he saw a classic dark red Ferrari parked in front of the repair shop. He studied it closely. This car belonged in an auction or a glass display case, not in this greasy garage. The engine coughed once more and fell silent. The door opened. Dust-covered boots, dark jeans, and a worn black jacket. A tall, muscular man stepped out. When he took off his glasses, Jeremy Renner's face came into focus. His demeanor belonged more to the streets than to Hollywood. He approached Henry, his voice simple but clear. "Good evening. Can you take a look?" Henry looked first at the car, then at the man. He seemed familiar, but he was probably just another rich guy showing off his toys. Henry grumbled to himself, "That toy is too expensive for my taste." The man laughed, his voice warm, but not mocking. "Yes, but it's still a car, isn't it, Henry?" Henry glanced at him and pursed his lips. "It's a motor," he said. Without further ado, he grabbed his toolbox and lifted the hood. He had no idea he was meeting Jeremy Renner. He just wanted to do his job. Tired but driven by habit, he leaned over the engine and began carefully inspecting the parts. Jeremy stood there with his hands clasped, watching him silently. "Do you always work alone?" he asked. Henry didn't even look up. "It's less trouble that way. Nobody really fixes anything anymore. Just replace the part and run up the bill." Jeremy shook his head. "I can understand that. Is there any real craftsmanship left?" Henry grunted in agreement. "Exactly." But just then, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. A momentary twinge. He clenched his teeth. "It's just fatigue," he thought. He couldn't stop while he had work to do. Jeremy moved a little closer and continued watching intently. Henry muttered quietly, "I'll take care of it. It'll be ready in 5 minutes." But what he didn't know was that the man standing in front of him was about to change his life. A cool evening breeze had settled over the city, but the heat in Henry's small garage still came from the rhythm of work. Oil, metal, dust, and old songs. Henry rolled up his sleeves and gripped his tool. He leaned over the Ferrari's engine, his eyes scanning the problem with experience. The man was still silent. Jeremy watched without blinking. Henry had seen men like this before, men who loved cars but knew nothing about them. But there was something different about this man. He was more attentive, more quiet, perhaps more broken. As Henry fiddled with the engine, he muttered to himself, "Too many wires, too many screens. You can't feel these machines anymore." Jeremy smiled slightly. "I respect men who—" While Henry worked, Jeremy remained standing beside him, his eyes following every move of the master. "So you've been doing this for a long time," he said. Henry didn't look up. "I've been here since 1974. It's the same as the day I opened." Jeremy whistled briefly. "That's rare these days," he said. Henry wiped his hands on a rag, then looked at the man carefully for the first time. "And you? What do you do?" Jeremy shrugged. "I'm in the entertainment business." Henry raised his eyebrows. "Music? Movies?" Jeremy paused briefly. "Movies?" Henry rolled his eyes. It's always someone from Hollywood who comes in these cars. Jeremy laughed. You're right, but it's not mine. It's a friend's. I borrowed it. I just love cars. Henry nodded. At least you respect it. Most rich people treat their cars like trophies. Jeremy's expression grew slightly serious. I've never cared about trophies. Henry said nothing, just turned back to the engine. He reached out and took the wrench. At that moment, he felt a sudden burning in his chest. The pain spread to his ribs. For a moment, his vision blurred, and his breath caught in his throat. He clenched his teeth to suppress the pain. This wasn't the first time. He couldn't stop now. He tightened the last bolt. The engine was ready. He had finished his work. Henry stepped back and wiped the sweat from his forehead. All right, let's give it a try. Jeremy got into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine started smoothly. The sound was almost like music. Henry crossed his arms over his chest. There you go. Jeremy gently turned the steering wheel. Perfect. Then he got out of the car and took out his wallet. How much do I owe you? Henry shook his head. Nothing. If the car runs properly, that's enough for me. Jeremy was slightly surprised. Are you sure? Henry motioned for him to go. I don't charge for easy jobs. If there's a problem, come back. Jeremy paused for a moment, then smiled sincerely. Then I'll bring you coffee next time. Henry grumbled. Don't bring Starbucks, bring real coffee. Jeremy shook his head with a smile. He got into the Ferrari, rolled down the window and said, See you, Mr. Carter. Henry didn't respond but watched the car drive away. At that moment, he didn't know who the man he had helped was or how much he would change his life. As Henry locked the shop door, his chest tightened once more. He held onto the door frame with one hand, waiting for the pain to subside. Eventually, he felt a little better. He turned off the lights. Another day, another repair. But that evening was different, because that man, Jeremy Renner, had already made up his mind to return. And this time, he wouldn't come empty-handed. As Jeremy drove through the quiet streets of Los Angeles, the sound of the engine didn't drown out his thoughts. His mind was still at the repair shop. As the night air brushed against Jeremy's face, his hands on the steering wheel were relaxed. But his mind wasn't on the road. It was on Henry Carter, the old mechanic, grumpy but honest, a rare breed in today's world. Jeremy had met many people in his life, actors, directors, people swimming in money. But Henry was different. He was real, pure. And though Jeremy didn't fully understand why he was so fixated on him, he wanted to know more. When he got home, he filled a glass with water, opened his laptop, and typed slowly into the keyboard, Henry Carter Auto Repair, Los Angeles. The first link that came up was an old, worn-out website. There were no ads, no colorful logos. Just this: Carter's Auto Repair, honest service since 1974. Jeremy examined the page. A few blurry photos. Henry when he was young, standing in front of the garage with a wrench in his hand. Below, reviews from old customers caught his attention. He began reading them with curiosity. I had no money, and I broke down on the highway. Henry fixed the car and said, pay me back when you can. Another wrote, my dad took his car to him for 30 years. When Henry passed away, he fixed the Chevy for free so we could take it to the funeral. Jeremy leaned back in his chair and looked at the computer screen. This man wasn't just a mechanic, he murmured. He was one of the men who kept this neighborhood going. He'd only spent an hour with Henry, but he knew now. Henry Carter was someone who didn't deserve to be forgotten. Jeremy turned his eyes back to the screen. How could he thank him? Money wouldn't work. He wouldn't accept it anyway. He remembered their conversation in the garage. Henry's words about old-fashioned work and mechanics who don't replace parts. Jeremy bowed his head, his eyes narrowing. That was the point. It wasn't just about paying him back. It was about keeping something alive, leaving a mark. Jeremy smiled slightly. It wasn't money he needed, it was a legacy. He shut down his computer and reached for his phone. There was someone he needed to call, but before he could dial the number, his phone suddenly vibrated. It was an unknown number calling. The phone vibrated again. The screen read, unknown number. Jeremy furrowed his brows. He paused for a moment, then answered. A low voice came from the other end. Hello, Jeremy Renner? Jeremy sat up straight. Who's this? The voice continued with a brief sigh. "It's Bill. I run the laundry across the street from Henry Carter's shop." Jeremy frowned. Why was this man calling him? "Where did you get this number?" he asked coldly. Bill paused. "I know it's strange, but I saw you at Henry's repair shop tonight, and I thought you were the only one who could help." Jeremy's heart sank. "What happened, Bill?" His voice was tense now. "Henry's in the hospital," Bill said slowly. "He collapsed at the shop yesterday." Jeremy jumped to his feet. He had already planned to return the next morning. But now it might be too late. He grabbed his keys. This debt couldn't wait. Henry wasn't a man to be forgotten. Jeremy never wasted words. He put on his jacket, stuffed his wallet into his pocket, opened the car door, and was on his way within minutes. He had a bad feeling. This wasn't the kind of situation where he'd stay the night and be discharged the next morning. When he pulled up in front of Carter's auto repair, the street was quiet. The dim lights he was used to seeing were out. There was a note neatly taped to the door. Jeremy got out of the car, the sound of his heavy boots echoing on the pavement. He approached the paper. It had only 3 words written on it: "Closed indefinitely." Jeremy's jaw tightened. The feeling that had been building inside him was confirmed. Henry wasn't there. The silence of the place was deafening. At that moment, he heard a pair of footsteps behind him. Jeremy turned around. A man in his 60s, wearing a flannel shirt, was standing there. He was in front of the laundromat across the street. His eyes recognized Jeremy. "You were the one who came last night, weren't you?" Jeremy shook his head slowly. "Bill." The man bowed his head and smiled sadly. "Yes. I'm sorry I had to find you this way, but I thought you'd want to know." Jeremy narrowed his eyes. "What happened?" Bill rubbed his beard, his voice hoarse. "He had a seizure while working the other day. It was serious. A customer found him slumped over in the garage." Jeremy's face tensed. He remembered Henry leaning over the engine, holding his chest. He remembered that moment. He had felt something was wrong, but he hadn't said anything. "Where is he now?" he asked sharply. "County General. He's been there since Monday." Jeremy bowed his head. The silence was brief. Then he stood up. His face was determined. Jeremy was heading toward his car when Bill called out from behind him. "Look, I don't know what's going on between you and Henry, but that man has lasted longer than most people in this neighborhood. He kept the garage going. Now." Jeremy stopped, turned around, and waited silently. Bill took a deep breath. "I don't know if he has the strength to fight anymore." Jeremy's fingers tightened around the keys. Henry had given everything he had to that shop. He had given it to the neighborhood, but now he was alone. At the moment he needed help the most, there was no one around. Jeremy couldn't ignore it. Without saying a word, he got into the car, turned the ignition, and drove away quickly. This wasn't just about a broken engine anymore. It was about fixing something else that was breaking down. It was about the community. It was about respect. It was about loyalty. When he hit the highway, his hands were clenched around the steering wheel. Henry hadn't asked for charity, but Jeremy wasn't offering it either. He would bring more. And whether Henry accepted it or not, Jeremy wouldn't leave that hospital without a plan. Because this wasn't just a visit. This was the beginning of something. The corridors of County General Hospital were filled with the smell of antiseptic and stale coffee. Jeremy walked with determined steps. His hard boots echoed on the linoleum floor. He wasn't here to play a role. There was no show here. He was here for Henry Carter. The nurse at the reception desk recognized Jeremy, but instead of looking at him and asking for a photo, she simply bowed her head. "I'm looking for Henry Carter. He was admitted a few days ago," Jeremy said briefly. The nurse looked at her screen. "Room 317, 3rd floor. His condition is stable, but don't expect him to be very talkative." Jeremy nodded and headed toward the elevator. Stable was good news, but if Henry was quiet, then something was serious. When he entered the room, it was dimly lit. There was nothing but the sounds of machines and a faint light. Henry was lying in bed. His face was pale. He was hooked up to IVs and a heart monitor. Jeremy paused for a moment and watched the man, as if he didn't know him. But he couldn't get the image of those hands repairing the Ferrari as if it were a bicycle out of his mind. He looked tired. His eyelids fluttered. His eyes focused on Jeremy. Then his lips moved. No, don't tell me your car broke down again. Jeremy gave a hoarse smile. Number, the engine is still purring. Henry sniffed, slowly bringing his hand to his chest. Jeremy's expression hardened. How bad is it, Henry? Henry shrugged, but even that movement was clearly difficult for him. The doctors say, my heart isn't listening to me anymore. It's like a broken engine, but fixing it isn't that easy. Jeremy's jaw clenched tightly. This wasn't just a bad week. This was serious, and Henry knew it very well. Jeremy leaned forward. Look, Henry, I want to help you. Henry let out a dry laugh. Son, I know you. You're famous. You've got money. I know what you're going to say. Jeremy didn't even blink. I want to pay for your treatment. Henry turned his face away. His gaze was dull, weary. There was a few seconds of silence. Then he slowly shook his head. Jeremy took a deep breath. I don't take charity, Henry said. There was still that old determination in his voice. Jeremy studied him closely. This man wasn't just proud. He'd stood on his own 2 feet his entire life, fighting alone. He wasn't going to change now. He shook his head slowly. All right, he said. You don't want money. He leaned back. There was a moment of silence. Then he leaned forward again suddenly. You built something, Henry, and now you're letting it go to waste. Henry frowned. What are you talking about? Jeremy raised his hand and counted on his fingers. The garage, your craftsmanship, the people in this neighborhood you've helped. What will happen when you're gone? Henry looked down. I guess it'll close, he said. Jeremy bowed his head. Does that seem right to you? Henry didn't answer. Jeremy could see the emotion sinking in. Then he spoke slowly. I have an idea. Henry squinted. I'm sure you do. Jeremy smiled slightly. Listen to me. Henry had spent his life fixing broken machines, but now Jeremy was going to fix something else for him, something bigger, and whether Henry liked it or not, this was just the beginning. When Henry recovered and was discharged from the hospital, Jeremy had already taken action. The old Carter's Auto Repair sign was taken down. In its place, a brand new sign was hung, teaching the next generation. Henry objected to the name on the sign. My name doesn't need to be on that damn building. Jeremy just smiled. It's not just a building, Henry. It's a story. Those words silenced Henry. When the shop reopened, far more people showed up than expected. Old customers, young people, children. Some just wanted to see Henry. Others wanted to learn. Jeremy stood in the back of the garage watching Henry. Henry was yelling. He showed the key in his hand and snapped at the 19-year-old apprentice. If you're fixing a car, hold the damn tool properly. Jeremy laughed. Henry was still Henry. That's why it worked. When evening came, Henry turned to Jeremy as he locked the door. His voice was low but sincere. I owe you, son. Jeremy shook his head. Number, you already paid me. Henry raised his eyebrows. How? Jeremy pointed to the shop. Because you showed me that teaching something is still valuable. That night, Henry stood in front of the garage. His eyes were on the sign. Henry Carter Technical Garage, since 1974. Below it was a new line. Because some things deserve to be done right. Henry smiled. Maybe he hadn't planned any of this. But life sometimes reserves its most beautiful surprises for the quietest of men. And in that moment, Henry understood. This story wasn't over. It would never be over.